U.S. intelligence and law enforcement agencies, including the CIA, FBI, and DEA, have refused to release information related to Nigerian President Bola Tinubu, invoking the Glomar response, a refusal to confirm or deny the existence of documents to protect national security. The response follows multiple Freedom of Information Act requests filed by Aaron Greenspan seeking investigative records on Tinubu and alleged criminal associates.
Now, the agencies argued that disclosure of any records could jeopardize U.S. national security by potentially revealing intelligence sources and methods. The CIA cited concerns that confirming any cooperation by informants or specific intelligence operations could expose individuals to retaliation and compromise broader intelligence networks. The case is currently before the U.S. District Court in Washington, D.C., with the agencies maintaining that privacy concerns and classified information protections justify their withholding of records. Now, joining us is lead investigative journalist, for really focus on this case, David Hundeyin. Good morning, and thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Good to have you. I think I want to start with, when the response is that we cannot confirm or deny, whether an individual is an intelligence asset or not, or is, an asset in any way, shape, or form or not. Is that to you interpreted as some level of confirmation that, yes, there is definitely something to hide, with a statement like that?
Well, so it's important to know the context in which that filing was made. So the purpose of the filing, information that was requested, was information that was in connection to a separate issue, which was the drug trafficking investigation records, which are held by sort of the cross-agency network. So that's the FBI, the DEA, IRS, the CIA, the State Department, and the U.S. Attorney's Office, which are the 6 government agencies that are involved in this lawsuit. These are the 6 U.S. government agencies that we sued to get this information. And basically, so the FBI has released the files that they have partially, with several redactions. The State Department released a few files with, almost entirely redacted. The IRS claimed to have lost their files, very conveniently. And the DEA and the CIA are the last remaining agencies. And so they made this filing. And the CIA claimed that, to reveal the nature or to even reveal any information that we have about this person, about the subject, would compromise U.S. national security by potentially exposing a human source, a CIA asset, to exposure, and that by doing so, that's what you're reading on your screen now. So that could obviously then be very easily and very logically interpreted to mean that the person that this information is being sought about is in fact a cooperating CIA asset. Not just a past CIA asset, but potentially even an active one. So that was the context in which this filing was made. And in my view, so I'm not a lawyer, but in my view, the more important takeaway from this filing that was made wasn't even that was made by the CIA. It was that was made by the DEA, which I also included in the tweet that I put out, where the DEA made an argument in black and white. The DEA said, so that's what is on the screen right now. The DEA said, well, even though Nigerians have a right to know what their government is up to, the citizens' right to be informed doesn't extend to knowing what their president was up to. So the argument that the DEA is making in court is that the right of 230 million Nigerians to know what their government is up to doesn't include the right to know what the person who heads their government was up to before he became head of government, as though the two things have no link to each other. This is an argument that could not, conscionably be made in the context of a U.S. government official, U.S. public official, but that's the argument that the U.S. government is making in its own court against the interest of 230 million Nigerians. So I just thought it's very important for the world to see that the people who champion democracy, who champion human rights and accountability in government, this is what they actually think of us, and this is the sort of arguments that they actually make about public office holders in the so-called developing world.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to bring, back the, I think you mentioned it already, whether, the allegations that he maybe was, an asset, and if he is currently still an active asset of the CIA, according to your revelations of what you're saying. But is it also fair for someone to argue that even if he wasn't, even the Nigerian president wasn't related or connected to the CIA in any way, shape, or form, they still wouldn't be able to tell you because, well, it jeopardizes the integrity of the CIA or, of some sort, the way that they've put it. So it's not necessarily meaning that he definitely is, with the fact that they cannot reveal it.
Well, so the reason that argument doesn't hold water is that in this case, so I'm actually going to read an excerpt from the CIA's filing, which I have in front of me, where in addition to merely just saying that we can neither confirm nor deny, which is a standard Glomar response, they actually go ahead to give the specifics of what would be exposed if they confirmed or denied. So it goes, as a general matter, the CIA does not reveal whether or not it had involvement in connection to or intelligence interests of specific individuals and or particular groups. Confirmation or denial of the existence or non-existence of records responsive to the request here would do precisely that. And doing so would reveal, among other things, sensitive information about the CIA's intelligence interests, activities, operations, and collection efforts, technical capabilities, and authorities. The CIA does not reveal the identity of its human sources because revealing the identity of a confidential source could expose agency tradecraft, among other human sources, and specific intelligence interests and activities. Now, there's a page that I'm scrolling to where his name was mentioned. Now, he says the indiscretion of one source in a chain of intelligence sources can damage an entire spectrum of sources. As such, confirming or denying the existence of records on a particular foreign national like Tinubu reasonably could be expected to cause damage to U.S. national security by indicating whether or not the CIA maintained any human intelligence sources related to Tinubu and identifying any access or lack of access any such sources had to intelligence concerning him. So I think it's very clear from that excerpt that what they're basically saying is we can neither confirm nor deny this, because confirming or denying this would basically, make it very clear that this person was or is an asset working for us, and that these potentially are the other people that are exposed to or connected to this person, and these are the tactics that we use for collecting information. In addition to this, even prior to this, prior in this FOIA case, some of the filings that have been made by other government agencies, including the CIA, have also invoked something called the Exemption 7C in the FOIA Act, which is an exemption relating to national security. So you then have to ask the very obvious question that if at every step of the case, the argument that is being made is not that we don't have any records of this person, or that we don't have any relevant records about drug trafficking on this person, the constant filing, the constant argument that is being made across all these agencies, the State Department, the FBI, the DEA, the CIA, is that releasing these records would somehow jeopardize U.S. national security. So you then have to ask, what exactly is the nexus between the president of a sovereign, the Federal Republic of Nigeria, which is a sovereign country, and the national security interests of the United States government? That's the question that needs to be answered. At the very least, that raises a very important question that needs to be answered. Why on earth is the president of Nigeria so somehow deeply intertwined with the national security of the US government? Is Nigeria a vassal state of the US? What exactly is going on here? Why is nobody answering any of these questions?
So speaking of nobody answering any of these questions, you alluded to in your tweet, at the end of your tweet, you said, let's see what the Trump administration or the Trump era will bring. Do you maybe think that this is something that will be challenged again now that there's a new sheriff in town in the United States of America? And do you expect different results if this is being challenged?
So that's a very difficult question to answer because, as you probably do know, it's been the tradition over the years that U.S. foreign policy, especially U.S. Africa policy, doesn't really tend to change across both Democrat and Republican presidents. However, why I have expressed a measure of optimism this time around is that Donald Trump, as you know, is not a regular U.S. president. It's definitely not a regular Republican president. He's something of a maverick. In addition to being a maverick, as you know, he has a very personal grudge against the so-called U.S. deep state, which happens to be the so-called intelligence community and the very people who are involved in this, disclosure lawsuit. And he has no re-election to look forward to. So basically, he has there's no reason for him to pump the brakes. There's no reason for him not to go pedal to the metal, full throttle from day one. Some have even gone as far as to speculate that because from 2026, where there are midterm elections, he might no longer have full control over the House and the Senate, that he's going to try his best to cram everything he wants to do into the first 2 years of his tenure. So if that were the case, and if he were going to be as vengeful as he has indicated that he's going to be with regard to the so-called U.S. deep state, there is a possibility that issues like this could be revisited, not because the U.S. government or the Trump administration particularly cares about, Africa, about Nigeria, but simply potentially to spite his predecessor. If there's a U.S. president that were capable of doing such a thing, it would probably be Donald Trump. So again, we don't know for a fact that that is absolutely what is going to happen, but I am cautiously, quietly optimistic about it.
All right. Let's see how that goes. But I'll still look back at that tweet again. And you had said at this point, there is nothing more to be said about the direct role that the U.S. government plays in ensuring that Africa is constantly destabilized and afflicted with terrible leaders who create poverty and devastation. And I'd like you to expand further on your thought process regarding this tweet. Yes, we've heard people point fingers at the United States in several conversations and maybe even tweets, as we've seen some that you have retweeted as well. But I want to hear your thoughts as to what you're seeing that's making you add that to your statement. Beyond this, is there more to it than this case?
Well, yes, because ultimately the geopolitical calculation that the U.S. has made regarding Nigeria, regarding Africa as a whole, or at least sub-Saharan Africa, is that this is the region of the world whose economic role is meant to be the supply of cheap industrial inputs, raw materials, and natural resources without beneficiation to the global economy. So basically, the entire global order that currently exists, where there's one group of people in Europe and North America who are in the service economy, who are at the top of the economic food chain, who have the highest standards of living. And then there's a secondary group of people in primarily in Asia who are involved in secondary manufacturing. And then there's the final group of people in Africa and parts of Latin America that are like at the bottom rung, whose job, according to this economic doctrine, is to do the mining and farming and basically bring stuff out of the ground. And then that stuff is sent to the coasts of Africa as quickly as possible, and it's exported to the places that actually matter. That is the economic role that has been designated to the African continent. And the US, as you know, is very much at the top of the economic infrastructure that makes this possible. So institutions like the World Bank, the IMF, the World Trade Organization, these are very much American-controlled institutions that very directly that play a very direct role in ensuring that this economic role that has been assigned to Africa, Africa doesn't escape this role, right? So it's why people often make the comment that the US government is basically a neo-colonial government, because that's essentially the existential purpose of US Africa policy. It's to ensure that not so much that Africans stay poor per se, but that the US remains at the top of the food chain by maintaining the existing global order. And if it just so happens that the existing global order has it with Africans at the bottom of the rung, then it means that Africans must remain poor. So one of the ways to ensure that this economic poverty is retained, that Africa doesn't break out of its role as a primary producer, is to ensure that the people who are in charge of Africa's economic and political decision-making processes are people who are controlled. So there are people who will not do things that resemble the decisions that were made in places like Indonesia, China, and India over the past few decades, where those countries broke out of their own primary production eras and moved up the value chain and sort of revolutionized the entire global economy as we know it. Africa is the last place on earth which is yet to have its industrial revolution. When Africa does become industrialized, the entire global economy as we know it will be completely transformed, and those who are at the top today will no longer be at the top. So in order to prevent that from happening, in order to keep a certain group of people in power, it's important that the people who are in power on the African continent must be under the thumb of people who are at the top, which is why it's important to know if the president of the most populated country on the African continent is in fact a US foreign intelligence asset, because that would tie in very, very neatly with this exact neo-colonial system of economic domination.
Yeah, I was going to ask that you double down or at least speak a little bit more about why these court revelations would mean much to present day Nigeria, and of course if you look back at 2015 to where we are, I've repeatedly said that our economic decline, in my opinion, our economic decline doesn't seem to just be mistakes made by persons in heading these positions, MDAs across the country. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. But it's not my opinion. My opinion doesn't matter here. But I want you to speak a little bit more on this, because if you look at what a CIA asset means, there's many roles that you can play as a CIA asset. It could be intelligence gathering. A quick Google search, shows intelligence gathering, operational support, influence operations, technology or expertise, counterintelligence, financial logistics and enablers, some of all of that, which aren't necessarily meaning that, you are being used by the CIA to, topple a government anywhere else, or, to do anything necessarily negative. You could really just be a little spy that they place in some village someplace. So, what exactly, if, this is true, what makes it such a damning revelation for Nigeria?
So first of all, it's not, one doesn't have to go very far to even confirm the objective fact of the individual in question being at the very least a tattletale and an informant for the US government. All you have to do is go to the WikiLeaks cables and literally just type this person's name and see what comes up. This person has spent decades basically snitching on everything there is to snitch about in Nigeria to the US embassy, right? And this is on public record. You just go to the WikiLeaks, I think it's wikileaks.org, and just literally type in the keyword Tinubu and see what comes up. There's literally hundreds of diplomatic cables filled with him tattletaling about everything there is to tattletale about in Nigeria to the US embassy. So that's an objective fact, first of all. Secondly, why this will be of such keen interest to Nigerians is that, as you rightly said, over the past decade, Nigeria's GDP has basically halved. We've gone from a $520 billion economy to a $258 billion economy in 9 years. That doesn't just happen because there was a poor manager in place in charge of the economy. Nigeria has been described as the world's largest black market economy. It's an economy that sort of grows by itself. It runs itself. So for you to take that economy and halve it in 9 years, it's not a matter of mere incompetence. That's a series of very deliberate, very competent, negative decisions that were made. So it's now important to know that where were these decisions made, right? Were these decisions made in Abuja, or were they in fact made in Washington, D.C. as part of an existing effort to ensure that the African continent does not escape its role as the world's designated producer of natural resources, with its people who are designated as hewers of wood and drawers of water? Is that what is going on here? That's why it's very important for Nigerians to know who exactly is running the Nigerian government, who exactly is in charge of making decisions for the Nigerian economy. Is it a group of people in Abuja, or are those people in Abuja merely water carriers for a group of people in Washington, D.C., working at the U.S. State Department? That's what is the key kernel to take away from here, that this is not just some sort of entertainment story that, oh, the Nigerian president is a tattletale, he talks too much to the US, and it's more than just the US gathering intelligence. It's a real national security problem here, where, as you recall, last year there was a move by this same person, this same president, to attack a sovereign country, to attack on Niger, which historically has been probably Nigeria's closest diplomatic partner ever. Probably even closer than Ghana. And there was an attempt to send the Nigerian military to illegally invade this country. This was something which was of no benefit whatsoever to Nigeria. There was no reason for Nigeria to do this. The so-called coup was a bloodless coup, and it had popular support. And then, being that Niger is a single buffer Nigeria has against the zone of chaos from Libya upward, there was no reason for Nigeria to want to destabilize Niger and potentially bring the wars of the North Sahara to its own border. And yet there was an attempt that was made to do this. Yeah. So who actually is making these decisions? It's very important for Nigerians to know. Is someone in Washington, D.C. making decisions like this on behalf of 230 million, potentially sending our men in the military to their deaths?
Yeah, all right.
And we had nothing to do with that. It's these are very important questions.
Yeah. Anyway, we here felt it was an important conversation to have, and that's why we, brought you in. Nigerians, of course, would continue to x-ray these revelations, and make the decisions for themselves, what these things mean, going forward. But thanks very much, David Hundeyin, for your time this morning, and of course, thanks for joining us. We'll speak with you again pretty soon.
Thank you for having me.